welcome back, everybody. So as you guys know, I've included this segment with my dear friend Beth Marshall. Oh my gosh, I can't even speak today. Beth Marshall. And she's just been this incredible spiritual guide for me and really helped me figure some things out. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to incorporate her in my show, is so that everybody gets to experience, beyond the doingness of life, there's a whole spiritually driven way of being. And so although I've learned a lot and I can speak into it, I figured what better than have Beth actually come on the show and speak into it and really guide us and support us in our journeys. So welcome, Beth.
Hi, Angie. How are you? Thanks for having me again. And you bring up a really interesting point. When we last met in early April, I had started going through, and we got to continue it to this conversation about the key aspects of building. You can call it anything from like a divine partnership to a partnership with spirit. I go back and forth, but you bring up a really interesting point before I revisit some of the points that I brought up last time and kind of complete that thought process. The phrase that you used of beyond doingness, and one of the ways that I've started speaking into this is that it's not like we want to get rid of doingness, right? Mm-hmm. And I can't remember if I spoke to this last time, but I used to have a mentor who used to joke, and she's like, if you're sitting on your couch going home and eating bonbons and not really doing anything, then you can't really take action, or you won't move the needle forward. So yes, there's a life beyond doingness, but it's actually a both and. So the doingness is usually the masculine inspired action type energy. But the importance that I've learned in my life, and you and I have had numerous conversations about, is that sometimes it's important to just sit still and connect with your internal guidance. Some people will call it intuition, some people call it something else, and just connect with that, and then the doingness kicks in. So I like to say I'm a super fan of being efficient, and so for me, it's great to be efficient, because if I can get guidance about what direction I'm supposed to go, and then I can feel into that and say, yes, that feels right, that feels like I'm supposed to go there, and then take inspired action, it's much easier than doing what I like to call, let's take wet spaghetti and just throw it against the wall and see what happens type of mentality. Which one sticks, which one doesn't, so on and so forth. So I've just learned in my 40-some-odd years on this planet, I like what works. I like what's efficient, so I let the guidance come through me, and then I take action. So it's actually a both and. So I just wanted to, since you made the beyond doingness, it's just I've reordered the doingness. So, to talk a little bit about, to continue the conversation about key aspects of building divine partnership, I'll just quickly review, and for anybody who wants more details, you can go back to the last show we did, which I think was in early April, the 6 steps that I teach and work with in terms of building a divine partnership. And the first one that I talked about was get quiet and listen. I like visuals. I'm a very visual person. So you can think of this one as a plane can't land on a runway that's full. So you may be getting divine guidance, but you can't really hear it because you're not slow enough to actually let the guidance land. I've heard other people refer to it. I like this phrase as well, that rest is a spiritual practice, and that rest actually allows us to get the information to be efficient with our tasks. So that was the first step. The second step was learning how to ask and receive. And so some people refer to this as a manifestation formula, but just a real brief review. What I mean by that is getting clear about, what is it that I want support with? What is it that I'm unclear about? And literally just kind of asking. Some people will say spirit, some people will say higher self, some people will say God, other people say Christ. For me, it's a very similar consciousness energy. So whatever works, universe, whatever works. So it's really about just asking and saying, I'm not really clear about what this is, what would you have me know? So it's a really simple kind of back and forth, and you'd be surprised if you've never done it before. It may sound a little wooey, right? But you and I have talked about this before, that for me, I got to be about practical woo. It can't just be there's actually got to be a back and forth dialogue. So it's super helpful when we're not clear about something or want guidance to actually participate in that conversation. So that's step 2. Step 3 is learning, and this is an art form in and of itself. I'll just say that right up front. Learning and understanding which voice you're listening to. Are you listening to the egoic voice that would have you stay comfortable? Or are you listening to spirit? And just real quick review, ego tends to feel constricted, rushed, analytical, me against them, I have to compete. That's usually what ego sounds like. And spirit has a much lighter sense. It's calmer. You often will walk around and I say, like, I'll just be walking around my house or outside and, taking a walk or something, and all of a sudden I'll have an idea just plop in my head. That's more spirit oriented to do that. And it's important to build that active communication with spirit in the ask and receive way. Number 4 that I reviewed last time, and I don't know that we got all the way through this one, was really taking a look at your context. And what I mean by that is, what are you being? How are you showing up in your life? Some people in our transformational world will refer to it as, what's your come from? What's your approach? How are you showing up? And the 3 parts that I reviewed is really having a willingness to say, like, I want to build this efficient back and forth conversation, whether it's with God or spirit or however you speak to it, like really being willing to develop the partnership. It's not a like, yeah, I'll do this when it's convenient. It's really getting into the practice or the habit. So, we'll talk a little bit about some routines and habits in a little bit that can help this process. But it can't just be, yeah, I want to have this relationship and I'm not going to do anything about it. So there gets to be a willingness. There gets to be a level of commitment and a vigilance, like I'm all in, I'm paying attention to what this is, I'm an active participant in it. And then the 3rd context that I recommend is this context of responsibility or being responsible. And this just basically presumes that you're going to own your role as a creator. You're not going to allow yourself to point outward that things are happening to me. You're going to say, wow, how did I have this show up in my space? Not that you're to blame, but these are my results. This is what's happening for me. What's under this? What do I get to take a look at? And it may seem crazy, but it's actually really, really powerful. It took me a long time to get there, but playing the game of life from that place is really powerful. So that's just a quick review of the ones that I went through. And the ones that I didn't get to complete last time that I usually recommend, when you go through all of those steps and you're actively engaged, step 5 is you really get to allow for time for integration and reflection. Because as you mentioned so perfectly when we started, you got to go beyond the doingness. You not only need time to be quiet and listen and sit back and say, where am I supposed to be going? Then once you go and you do and you create results, if you're going to be a powerful creator, you're going to need to stop and take a look at what's happening. And I always recommend to people that, the name of the game is, you can look at the movie screen and point your finger and say, I want to change what's in the movie, what's happening outside of me. But it's actually more powerful to take a look at the film and the projector. Like, what are your thoughts? What is it that's creating what's in front of me? And it's really one thing to listen, and it's another thing to actually have what you want to have happen take place, embody it. And that usually takes, by my experience, it takes time, it takes space. And that's everything from mental space to physical space to time space. And really going through the practice of emptying yourself, looking at what's happening, and really being a detective in your own life. And that's another space. It's not just the space at the beginning, being quiet that you can listen, but then once a bunch of things happen, and you learn to, or I've learned to, I guess I should say, fold it into my life. So I'm going, and then all of a sudden I have this feeling of being full, and I'm like, I gotta stop. You and I were chatting before I hopped on about the fact that I'm looking forward to some rest time this weekend, because I've been going through a lot of stuff, and I just want to stop and be a detective. I want to look at things that are happening, what's shifting, what's going well, what's not, and so that I can tweak anything that's happening. So that time for integration and reflection is really important. And then the final step is what I like to call being spiritually obedient. And, I kiddingly say that. But basically what that means is trust and take action on the guidance that you get. And because without movement or action, things will stagnate. And this really can be small at first. So you don't need to be asking, you don't need to be creating anything on anything big in your life. You can practice with small things. In terms of something that you want to create, ask for information, receive it, take small action, and then watch what happens. And it's kind of like building a muscle if you're going to the gym. So really taking action, because if you're getting guidance, if you're asking, if you're creating quiet space, you're asking and receiving guidance, you're delineating, okay, this is what Spirit's asking me to do, and then you're allowing time for integration and reflection, but you're not taking any action, then Spirit's just going to be like, well, I keep giving him or her information, and why are we doing this exactly? So it stagnates the flow and it stops things. So it's really important to demonstrate that you're listening to Spirit and following the lead. So those are the 6 key steps. I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts, Angie. I definitely can offer some things about habits and routines about developing that process as well.
Well, as you know, like you and I have had several conversations about this, and one of the things that I love about you is that practical woo aspect, right? And it's not, you may be speaking about the spirit, God, universe, but it could really be even our own instincts. So listening to what, you know, our gut is saying. It doesn't have to be like that, you know, I laugh and I'm stumbling because honestly, I used to have that image, right? Like of anything spiritual was like, oh, you had to sit there and meditate and be umming your whole day and be with all these crystals and incense and your little magic ball. And it's so not like that. It could just simply be, you know, taking the 5 minutes of your day and quieting your mind and just allowing yourself to be in the present moment, right? And getting clear on what your intention is for the day. And so, you know, like all of these points, I love that you split them up, but for me, I'm like, it just happens all at once, right? And you were saying like, you know, and going and speaking into the doingness or being, you know, when I said beyond the doingness, I found myself, before I met you, like, I feel now there's like, it's a pendulum, it's a dance. Yeah. And so when I was always doing, and I would get things done, right? I'm like, I could knock that checklist off and I was a task monster. But I wasn't really taking the time to pause and collect my thoughts on what I wanted. Right. And enjoying it, right? And being able to like really taking that time to stop and smell the roses, right? So that could even be that stopping point and connecting with Spirit to enjoy what is happening around you. So I really appreciate the way you break things down in a way that even somebody like myself who doesn't really practice spirituality, I'm going to say at that level, right? But it's still something that I can really incorporate into my life.
Yeah, and I'm glad that it supports you, and hopefully it supports some other folks as well. And you know, you bring up a good point. 2 things that popped out at me in what you just said that I just want to make note of is it doesn't need to be this big. I actually would recommend that it doesn't need to necessarily be this like big, huge spiritual entity outside of me, because at the end of the day, whether we're calling it universe, God, Christ, Spirit, source, intuition, higher self, whatever it is, for me, all of those energies are fairly interchangeable, because what we're really looking to do is get to and integrate the best version of ourselves, right? So that requires balance of energy. And you referenced, so the other part that I picked up on is you talked about the dance, right? So one of the ways that I've recently started talking about that, because I used to be like you, right? Where I was just like, to-do list for days, and I got it done. I had a consulting career for the earlier part of my professional life where it was not uncommon to work 70 to 80 hours a week. And I had like to-do lists, and I would just crunch through it. But what ended up happening was I had that masculine action-taking muscle really well developed, but I didn't have the more feminine energy, if you will, of taking rest, listening and getting quiet, and having my action be directed in a way that felt good, right? Like there wasn't, I encourage people to think of it as, the way that I speak about it with some of my clients is, the feminine and the masculine energy. It's really, if you figure it, it's like a figure eight laid sideways, right? So you're going back and forth between it. And that is what I was talking about earlier, like getting quiet, kind of spending some time over here, if that's the feminine side, right? And then all of a sudden, once something's clear, okay, now you want to kick into action. And you really want it to be, it doesn't need to be a perfect figure eight all the time. But again, I'm a very visual person. I like to think of, okay, now I'm in a period of, I want to come up with some new creative ideas. I'm going to stay over here for a while. Now I know what I'm doing. Now I'm going to go over here for a while, and I'm going to get into that task-oriented space. And it's really, you didn't say this word, I don't think, but it really becomes for me a fluidity between listening, building this relationship with spirit, and then getting kind of my marching orders, if you will. Right? So where am I going? What am I doing? What am I up to? What are the best uses of my talents and abilities? And then going to get it done. So it becomes this fluid back and forth. You might spend some time on one side of the pattern more so than the other. But yeah, it becomes a fluid process where you're moving back and forth.
Well, and unfortunately, I love speaking with you. We can talk for hours. We literally have. But our time has run up, but I really do appreciate you coming on. This month, we were a little bit late, but next month in June, we will be here on the second Friday. I forget the date of that. I believe it's the 7th. And Beth will be here again. And so I invite everybody to send in your comments, any questions, anything you want to know from Beth. Beth, how can we get a hold of you if we want to reach you directly?
Sure. I have a Facebook page for A Spirit Driven Life, which is the name of the spiritual and transformational coaching business, so you can find me there. You can also find me via email at aspiritdrivenlife@gmail.com, or you can give me a call or throw me a text at 508-728-7842.
Well, and thank you. And that's the other thing, too, is that she will pick up that phone herself. And
Yes, I will.
Yeah, so it's like it's not going to have your people contacting her people. It's like you really get a true connection with Beth. And Beth, thank you so much for joining, and see you in a few weeks. For everybody else watching right now, stay tuned. We're going to have a dear, great friend, Greg, speak about how to overcome some of your fears. So thanks for watching.